He believed that his wealth was what made him successful. Inaccessible until the judge said the word too. Words that altered the course of everything. There was a multitude of cameras lining the courtroom. Reporters on the rear wall murmured to one another. Additional individuals recording notes on their laptops. That heaviness of quiet that was exclusive to air. Trials that are high profile and the kind where everyone in the room was aware of what they was going to view, something that will go down in history. And there was Richard sitting in the middle of it all. Sterling, he is a man who is worth billions of dollars. His empire was founded via sheer cunning and strategy. The cruelty of a guy who was convinced that he was exempt from the regulations that applied to everyone else. Sterling leaned back in his seat and relaxed. The fact that he was dressed in a completely unfazed, a well-tailored gray suit and unblemished white shirt, no tie, since there was no reason to bother with this because it wasn't a man to whom, according to the norms of anyone, his in and of themselves, cufflinks undoubtedly cost more than, according to the annual pay of the typical juror. Pure amusement was the expression that this was merely an additional gathering for him in a different boardroom, in which he might exert influence over the participants. Proceed to leave. Ignored the mutterings that were heard in the courtroom. All of the noise subsided as the best friend of the person. There was a surge in the room when one reporter moved. Even the jury, as well as the attorneys and spectators, holding one's ground with regard to the judge about to enter, but Richard Sterling was not one of them. Smiled and remained seated with their arms folded. The courtroom was filled with a murmur that spread like a rippling effect in the still water. The reporters remarked that the jury sneaked looks at each other. Toward him, the attorney for the prosecution clenched his teeth even as he was well aware of what. I had no idea what kind of day this was going to be, and finally, Judge Mia Adams made her appearance. She was a woman who was able to command respect without her requiring a request in the middle of the 50s. Keen eyes, an unflappable and steady presence that she possessed, recognized arrogance in the past, entitled. There are crooked officials, executives, and affluent men who held the belief that power was a shield. She didn't even turn her head to look at Sterling. There was no break, and Flinch did not recognize me. An obvious demonstration of her own superiority, she merely sat down and made some adjustments to her robe, retrieved the file that was placed in front of her. Court is currently in session, and her voice remained firm. Managed, but the energy that is there in the space was already in motion due to the fact that everyone was asking the same question: what exactly was it? The efforts of Richard Sterling to demonstrate, and the most essential question was, what was he going to do next? But regardless of what they anticipated, they were unprepared for what was going to happen next. An oppressive hush pervaded the atmosphere, awkwardly stretched over the entirety of the room. Everyone was aware of Sterling's refusal to accept that. Not only was it a sign of arrogance, but it was also it was a deep murmur that rumbled through the statement. The kind of whispers that are whispered in the crowd only take place when individuals are attempting to find meaning in anything that they are aware of. Not just incorrect, but I really can't believe they just observed a young reporter who was one of the reporters. Lady carrying a notepad that is covered in a small and scribbled figure leaned in her direction. Colleague, did he just whisper that she was all right? He scarcely blinked his eyes, the clerk in the courthouse, in the direction of Sterling. His expression, the bailiff, which was standing solid near, was unreadable. There was a little movement of the judge's bench. However, we are waiting for a signal from the judge. The judge, Adams, did not respond, and she did not. She did not look in his direction and simply paused. Carried on with the process of completing the formalities. It seemed as though nothing had occurred. It was a maneuver. It is only possible for a seasoned judge to pull off, not granting individuals such as Richard Sterling a sense of contentment in the knowledge that they had. The rest of the people in the room, including you, they lacked the same level of composure shown by the jury. A few fleeting looks, the most of them being older. The participants made a narrow line with their lips. Draw attention to their annoyance evident to others. Showed a look of uncertainty while staring at Sterling. In order to determine whether or not this was a stunt. As well as something more profound, the prosecutors at their table was concentrated and kept their mouths shut. Nevertheless, their chief attorney was firmly holding his white-knuckled pen with a high level of intensity on. Sterling is located on the opposite side of the room. The legal staff continued to practice their craft. However, they had become accustomed to his antics. It had been a lucrative arrangement for them to act as if there was never a single item that was amiss, but even they were aware that this was not the same Sterling. Was not only another wealthy individual within a man who had a costly lawyer, he was a man who had spent decades subjugating the entire globe to his will. At this point, he was confronted by the Judge Mia. A woman who did not flinch in the face of danger, Adams. Woman who was a face of authority and whose record was people who were flawless and did not care about money. Lacked concern for the effect of others, did not care concerning the games that men such as Sterling played. She came to comply with the law, and she did so today. It was time for Richard to face the law. All of the cameras that are located in the rear of anything that was captured on video in the room. Sitting there, refusing to acknowledge the situation. Already, the authority of the court was exercising. Now being posted and making its way into. From newsrooms to social media to the internet. Screens of television, but Sterling he was not. Appeared listless, as if he were a man who had already judged the conclusion with the confidence of a man who knew whatever it was that no one else did, and then the accusations were read out loud, and that is when however, the vibe in the room altered once more. This time, it was a lot more severe than a prosecutor stood there, making his suit more smooth. Prior to speaking, his voice was wearing a jacket. Although calm and thoughtful, it carries a weight that caused everyone to sit up more than usual. More upright, Your Honor, the state will provide you with. Richard Sterling is the defendant in this case. Indicted on charges of securities fraud, bribery, and the phrase obstruction of justice lingered in the air. Despite the fact that the air was heavy and dense, a majority of those present in the courtroom already was aware of the allegations made against Sterling. The allegations being uttered out loud to the public. The experience was enhanced with something genuine, such as drawing on a basis that has been established, and the billionaire had already been spread out, and he leaned in his chair. He was adjusting the cufflink on his shirt, continuing to give off the same appearance of. As he entered, he was displaying indifference, but those who were familiar with his work was aware of the. In point of fact, Richard Sterling had never ever been in a situation from which he was unable to purchase his way out. Until this point, Judge Adams took a quick look at While the attorney nodded, the prosecutor continued. And took a step forward. He was aware that he wasn't merely arguing a case that he was going to ascend. Competing against one of the most influential persons in the nation, a private individual whose riches had been based on breaking the law until it is broken. Mr. Busted the bank over the period of 15 years. Sterling was the mastermind behind all of the most strategies that involve intricate financial fraud in. Through the use of insider trading in modern history, market manipulation and offshore transactions. He pilfered accounts belonging to investors, money laundering and bribery of government officials. It was a cover-up by the officials. There was put a few members of the jury in the cell. He believed that no one was able to furrow their brows, would be able to capture him. He believed his power impeded his ability to be touched, but today we exhibit evidence that cannot be refuted that Richard, in a conscious and willing manner, Sterling, consistently disobeyed the law, causing destruction. Throughout the process, thousands of lives were lost. Lawyer made a tiny round and looked in the direction of the defense table, and he is going to be there today, held responsible for Sterling's way of leading. There was a lawyer by the name of Daniel Graves standing. In order to avoid the weight of the words from rising to, Graves advised that you should not settle too deeply. Graves. Without any difficulty, Mr. Sterling keeps his. By portraying a picture of innocence, the prosecution is picture that may not accurately depict the subject. In point of fact, the defense will demonstrate that these assaults are constructed on the basis of supposition and, as opposed to the facts, Judge Adams is an ion. Once it was realized that the prosecution would continue, the defense attorney made his way to the evidence. Anything up to this point has been studied him now. The entire thing had just been turned by Sterling. Courtroom on its head, because this was no longer the case. Not only about his guilt, but it was now focused on the other people who got their hands dirty in the instant he stood up, everything was different. The fallout, on the other hand, which had only started. The courtroom remained still for a whole 3 seconds. After a moment of astonished quiet, mayhem came. The press went into a frenzy over the situation. Whistles and the sound of fingers moving over keyboards. An increase in the volume of the hushed shouts. The counsel for the defense engaged in a heated exchange. A quick glance at their meticulously constructed poker. For the very first time, faces starting to fall and he did not move the prosecutor, and he did not move. He tried to speak, but his jaw muscled up just enough. To those who are paying great attention to observe. For the first time, Judge Adams tapped her gavel. The noise did not go away despite a single strong motion. Comprehensively, but Mr. Sterling was taken aback by it. She stated that the location was quiet yet illegible. Place the document on the table, and then take a seat. A half-curl appeared on Sterling's lips at this moment. Smiling, he had everyone exactly where he wanted them to be. He positioned the paper for them in a slow manner. Down, nevertheless, he did not sit down but instead retained his. Putting one's hands on the table's edge and leaning back. With a tiny sense of ownership over the space in a manner in which only a man who has nothing left to do. He was able to recognize that this is the thing that he. The smoothness of his voice continued, I'm not. When I declare that I am innocent, I am implying that if I let his words hang in the air as he went down. After looking around the room, I will not be going down. By itself, a fresh form of attention that is rapt. Rather than focusing solely on him during the courtroom. Now, but with regard to the other individuals engaged. Because at this moment there were others sitting in that very room, persons dressed in business attire. Individuals in positions of authority who were unexpectedly. The judge, Adam, was extremely anxious and studied him. You are making a serious commitment, unshaken. She made the claim, Mr. Sterling, and she asked, do you have evidence that Sterling breathed out slowly? It was his fingers that were tapping the document. More than sufficient, the prosecutor has at long last. His tone was firm and deliberate as he spoke. Maintain your honor, this is certainly a matter of final-minute prank to divert attention away from the Sterling didn't even bother to file charges against him. If you were to look at him, you would naturally conclude that Suddenly, something made the air crackle. Judge Adams made an unexpected move and leaned forward. If she stated that what you are stating is accurate, you will be given the chance to give a presentation to properly provide that evidence, but allow me to make. She hesitated for a moment. Mr. Sterling, something clear. There was a subtle lowering of her voice with this. You should not consider the courtroom to be a stage. May influence the events that are taking place. You are incorrect. Sterling's smirk faltered just a little bit. Because she was a woman he had been seeing for a moment. Was unable to shake a woman he was unable to purchase. After that, there was a distinct quiet that followed. Heavier, and everyone was aware of what was arriving. Due to the fact that Sterling has already played the most important card, and Judge Adams was now going to make her first move in the near future. Richard's time since the beginning of the trial. Sterling did not appear to be so confident about himself. In the course of his investigation, Judge Adams, the moment when her fingertips were lightly pressing on the bench, she did not show any reaction. With regard to her feelings, she was not shaken off. Calculating, and that is the most important thing of all. Produced Sterling. Restless Bayeth, she remarked. Eventually, she was able to find that paper that a law enforcement officer stomped on. Grabbing the paper from the front for the forward. The entire courtroom was placed at the defense table. Would the judge be willing to steal its breath? In all seriousness, would she disclose the individuals? According to Sterling, they were involved, but she did not read it, but she did put it away instead. Your jaw is clenched, Sterling, and you are not going to. Judge Adams looked him in the eyes to take a look at it. Mister, this is a court of law, and it is unshakable. Sterling does not constitute a negotiation table. The weight of those remarks began to weigh down on him. Because all of a sudden, for the very first time all throughout his life, he was powerless in this place. Mr. Sterling, the courtroom was completely silent. The evidence against you was then continued by the judge. Has undergone a comprehensive examination of the state. Possesses extensive evidence that demonstrates your illegal activities, including but not limited to justice, as well as your unexpected attempt to maneuver. Blame does not release you from responsibility for your actions. A bob of the throat was heard from Sterling. Due to the fact that this court finds you, she allowed. The moment is being consolidated by the pause hang. In every respect, the words hit like a ton of bricks. Every single person in the room let out a loud gasp. A flurry of reporters vying to be the first to report. Spectators should be notified promptly of breaking news. Muttering in surprise and shock at the news to one's content. But Sterling, he did nothing but stand there unmoving, while maintaining a firm grasp on the table's edge. Making sense of the reality that for the very first time, a period of his life during which he had shed Judge Adams wasn't finished, you developed an empire on it. Utilizing Mr. Sterling's manipulation on lies, you believed that your riches was what made you who you are. It was unquestionable that justice was fair. Another thing that money might purchase, but in the present day, what you discovered is that this court does not. It serves the power that it serves. Sterling S.W., the law, followed his statement. As he pressed himself into a close line, he looked, circling as if anticipating that someone, anyone, might. He was the only one who came to his aid since his entire life had been dedicated cultivating adversaries. And now, when it was most important, he was there. The voice of the judge is unwavering when he is alone. It is planned that your sentence will take place at A. In the future, you will continue to stay until then. It is possible to remove the defendant from custody. Officer took the initiative and placed a firm deposit. Sterling's arm was placed on, and just like that. In reference to Richard Sterling, the billionaire. Someone who believed he was untouchable was led astray.